Hey there! I think we're live. Hi, I'm Marta, and this is Divergent Design Studios live stream. And Divergent Design Studios is an online community where we help neurodivergent creatives build consistently satisfying creative practices and design lives that really work. Anyway, that's the tagline that I'm working on, playing around with. I'd love to know what you think. Let me say it one more time. An online community helping neurodivergent creatives to build consistently satisfying creative practices and design lives that really work. So I'd love to have you tell me a little bit about what you think about that in the comments, just to get us started. I see one person has given me a little thumbs up to let me know that they're here. I'm expecting a few more folks. And today we're talking about, again, executive function. It seems to be becoming a sort of recurring theme on this live stream, and I want to assure everybody that it is not actually the only thing that I talk about. In fact, it's like my least favorite thing to talk about. I'm not really all that excited about executive function. But it does seem to be something that a lot of neurodivergent people are really interested in and concerned about, if sort of the performance of my other videos on executive function is any indication. And so I thought I would just round out the conversation that I've been having in the first couple of live streams about executive function with this. It will be the final time that I ever talk about executive function, not by a long shot. Obviously, it's something that is really important to neurodivergent people to think about and figure out. And I'll certainly loop back around to it. But it is, like I said, not by a long shot the only thing that I want to talk about on this live stream. And so I'm also thinking towards the future, that being like next week, about what I might talk about. And one of the things that I'm getting really interested in, or I have been interested in for a really long time, but would love to expand the conversation to my online audience, is about interior design, actually, and specifically interior design for neurodivergent people, designing spaces that really work for us. And I guess in some ways that topic would have is in some ways related to executive function. Oh, thanks. Spiral Nerd says, I like your little DDS description, Divergent Design Studios description. That's sort of what I'm working on. I don't know that I'm ever going to be one of those people who can just like reel it off. Hi, I'm Marta and I'm your host. This is Divergent Design Studios. I just don't know if I'm ever going to be that person. Even though I would like to turn this into a podcast. Anyway. Thank you very much, Spiral Nerd. I appreciate your comment and the thumbs up. That's really helpful. But anyway, getting back to some thoughts about possible future episodes of this live stream, I do want to talk about interior design, and I do actually think that it connects to this question about executive function, because I think that often the ways that we design our spaces aren't really, they're more about what we think we should do or how our spaces should look or how they should work. And they're not really designed with us in mind and our own strengths and deficits. So, building on our strengths and accommodating for our deficits. So that's something that I'm really eager to talk about more and think may be the topic or one of the topics of next week's live stream. But today we are swinging back around to executive function. And if you've been following the live stream from the beginning, the first episode several weeks ago now was about the distinction between executive function and design thinking. And my firm belief that those are two different paradigms with different sets of values and different they're two different ways of being and working in the world. And that, in fact, Um, they're not necessarily, one isn't necessarily better or worse than the other. Although actually I do have a bias, um, but putting that aside for a moment, I really think that they are two separate ways of being and working and existing in the world, and that most neurodivergent people are not so great at being executives, but that we are in fact really good at being designers. And so if you want to go back and take a look at that episode, I'll try to soon get links in the description so that you can find those. But it's the first live stream that I did where I talked about the distinction between executive function and design thinking. Um, and then in the second episode of the live stream, I talked about the fact that, be that as it may, even though we are in fact really great designers and not great executives, the fact remains that we live in a society that is designed for executives. It is built around the assumption that in order to be successful, you need to be good at these so-called executive functions. And so, as a consequence, even though there's a whole other set of skills called design that we are good at, we are still nonetheless disabled by the fact that we can't function well or naturally and consistently as executives. Um, and yeah, and I think that that's true. Um, and I think that the solution to that is, as best we can, to hack the executive functions to the extent that we absolutely have to rely on them, but rather, more importantly, to design our lives around a different paradigm, to create lives where being designers is at the center of it so that we can actually be successful um, on our own terms, whatever that means for you as an individual. I think you're going to find more success if you design your life not around hacking executive functions, but around building up your natural strengths as a designer and the skills that are involved in that. But as I said, the fact remains that we do exist in this society that expects us to be executives, and we do um, uh, have to function along those lines, especially when we're in school, especially in the world of employment. Um, and there are ways that we would like to be better at some of those skills, even in our own homes and in our private lives. If those skills involve like being organized and less forgetful and more able to be punctual and to show up to things on time, those kinds of things, I do recognize that those deficits, that those difficulties that we encounter are real. I'm not in any way saying that they're not real. But that brings us to the question of like, what do you do about that? To the extent that we are disabled by a society that demands that we be executives, and to the extent that we can't completely design our way out of that society, right? What do we do about it? What do we do about sort of building up our capacity to function on that executive level? And that's what I want to talk about today. Um, so the good news is that I do think that there are solutions. The bad news is that I don't think that they are simple. And I don't actually think, for the most part, that they involve the sorts of hacks that you may have been Googling and that may have brought you to this video, frankly. And I do actually have a video that's called something like 6 executive function hacks that really work, or 6 ADHD hacks that really work. I can't remember what it's called. It's my best performing video, honestly. I made it several years ago. Interestingly, I'm actually in that video. If you ever go watch it, I'm sitting in exactly the same spot, looking at exactly the same window, but everything behind me has changed. I have completely redesigned this room. But anyway, that video does offer some very specific hacks that have been helpful for me. I have I haven't been able to bring myself to watch it again for a really long time, so I can't even really remember what all's in there. But people have told me that it's really helpful. But sometimes I think that I suspect that what is most helpful about that video is actually the sort of affirmation that I offer to neurodivergent people to not feel bad about themselves because they're not executives, and that's, I think, what has like is the reason that that video kind of took off. I'm not really sure that whether or not the hacks that I offered in there, the little strategies, were helpful or not. I do think that there are hacks and strategies that can work. And I'm happy to talk about a few of them that work in my own life later on in this video. And what I would really love, if you're watching this live or if you're watching this later, if you would drop a comment down below about what are the hacks and strategies that really work in your life? And I'm not talking about work for a couple of days or a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, but that have consistently worked to make you able to do the things that executive dysfunction makes difficult. I would love to offer up, like a compilation of those strategies and hacks that have worked for people. And again, I'll talk a little bit later about some that have been helpful to me. But what I really want to talk about right now is why I think, for the most part, executive function hacks and strategies don't work, and certainly don't work consistently or over the long term. And then what alternatives there are in the face of that fact. Because I think, if we're being honest with ourselves, right? I think that for most of us, we're constantly, especially when we first discover that we're neurodivergent, we're like so relieved that, oh, there's some explanation for why things have been so hard for me. And then we start looking for solutions. And Lord knows the world out there, the ADHD industrial complex, the autism industrial complex, they are so happy to offer you solutions, especially sell you solutions. So there's just a million hacks and apps and calendaring systems and notebooks and online courses and all sorts of other things that you can pay good money for, to, to help make your life better. And again, if you have found things that really work for you, wonderful, and I'd love to hear about them. If they really do work, I would be happy to sing that from the rooftops. But my experience, and the experience of so many people that I've talked to, is that those things work sometimes for a little while, and then they often just stop working. And my biggest concern, is that when they stop working, they just end up contributing to our sense of failure, to our sense of shame about the fact that we can't function in the world the way that we're supposed to function in the world. So I don't know if that resonates for anybody, but I'm going to take a quick look at some of these comments that are coming in. Oh, Sidra, thank you so much. I love you too. So wonderful. And I also really love that beautiful avatar that you have of a red butterfly. That's gorgeous. I love that. Amelia says, being okay that some things only work for a few months and then don't, and that it's okay to switch to another one and cycle because something in my inner or outer environment changes or I need novelty. Yes, I agree 100%, Amelia. I mean, I think that if anything, that's like the best hack. Is just, well, one of the best. And it's actually one of the things that I want to talk about, is just realizing that we do, that our needs change. Oh, wait. Okay, great. I didn't mean to put the new comment up quite so soon. I'm going to take that down, talk about what Amelia said, and then go back to that. Yes, I think that that there's just no question that many neurodivergent people really thrive on novelty. And so one of the things that I've suggested in the past to people is that you shouldn't feel bad about that fact. And that if you just have a repertoire of strategies that work, then you can just sort of cycle through them without feeling bad, right? And that's great if you can do that. Absolutely. Let's go back and look at this one from Spiral Nerd. A little hack I find helpful: driving to somewhere pretty where I don't have Wi-Fi when I have reading or writing tasks to do on my computer. Oh, I love that. Um, I think that that touches on a whole bunch of things. One is just like the distraction of our online lives. And I'm not somebody who's going to like, I mean, I have lots of criticisms about social media and media in general and all the rest of it, but I am hardly somebody to, demonize online life. I really do believe that online communities can be wonderful and rich and healthy, and that it's important um, to have them. But I also know that there's lots about the ways that social media, especially, is designed to, hook us in and keep us scrolling and fuel our outrage and all of those kinds of things. And even if we're immune to that, or we've been able to like figure out how to avoid it, it still is just a shiny thing, right? A shiny distraction. So I think that getting away from our online lives when we really need to be present for something else can be super helpful. Yeah. There are other ways to do that. Like, I love this idea of driving away and just like getting out of Wi-Fi range. That's great. Um, but there's other things. I think that there are apps that you can use that can limit your online time or sort of force you to only be online for a certain amount of time. Of course, there's always ways to circumvent those. But I think the other thing that's really important about what Spiral Nerd is saying is it's not just driving away from Wi-Fi, but it's driving somewhere pretty. And I think that especially if that somewhere pretty is, um, I was going to say, is it somewhere in nature, I think can be very regulating to our nervous systems. But it doesn't even have to be nature. Like, I love being in one of my favorite coffee shops, although I do have Wi-Fi there. But just like if I went to an art museum, like I could probably get a lot done if I sat in the gallery of an art museum, because it would just be beauty everywhere, and that's just very soothing for me. So I love that idea. Let's see. A couple of other um, I'm going to add this. It's so frustrating when things stop working at the worst moment. That is the problem, isn't it? With that whole sort of like rotating through your repertoire strategy, is that sort of by definition, things stop working at the worst moment. And like that is not the moment necessarily when you actually have sort of the bandwidth to shift to something new. That's the moment when you just like throw your hands up in the air and feel frustrated, and then start to feel like a failure, which just um, fuels all those bad feelings, right? Um, but yeah, I think that that's so true. I very much empathize with that. I'm not sure how to say your name, Abijcj. I think that must be like an abbreviation for something that I'm not going to try to pronounce. Um, Julie says, I agree with going to a different space to concentrate or allow thoughts to flow. Um, and then she also says, my common hack is making sure I see visual reminders. That's a really important one for me as well. I'm very visual. Um, like I said, a little bit later, I'll talk a little bit about one hack that has actually, I don't even know if I should call it a hack. Someone once said that they don't like the term hack, and I kind of agree. They said that they use the term workaround, which I think is probably a better way to think of it, is that like there's an obstacle in your way and you figured a way to work around it. I like that. But yeah, keeping it simple and visual is super important to me. And I'll talk about the strategy that I have now for my sort of to-do list and my calendaring, that I've been doing now consistently for a year, which is the longest that I've ever done anything really, in terms of sort of a routine or a strategy for my life. Um, yeah, I can talk about that at the end of this live stream. I'm going to put up this one last comment from Spiral Nerd. Yeah, I often need some degree of external stimulation to stay focused, and nature does a great job of offering visual, auditory, etc. stimulation that's grounding and doesn't pull me off task. Yeah, I I agree so much, and I don't usually like to say studies have shown if I can't actually cite the studies, um, which I can't right now, but I am pretty sure that there's a body of literature out there that shows that that a natural environment, like being near trees or water or meadows, being able to see like the horizon, having like big expansive vantage points, that is very regulating and soothing for the nervous system, and puts us in a sort of in a zone where we can function better. Um, and I have definitely found that for myself, 100%. Um, but it's interesting. We got off on this tangent a little bit, not a tangent, but I had sort of not intended to talk about these specific hacks until later. But then I saw them popping up in the chat box, and I can't resist. Um, and um, I think that what I did intend to talk about, and this whole discussion about regulating the nervous system brings it back around, is this. And I'm speaking largely from my own experience here. And as I always like to say, I'm acutely aware that the plural of anecdote is not data, and that a study sample of one is not, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I also think that sharing our personal experiences, especially around healing, can be really empowering and encouraging and hopeful. So I hope that you will take my own story with that in mind. Um, and my own experience is simply that for the vast majority of my life, until I was around 51 or 52, I would say, I was finally diagnosed as ADHD when I was around 51. I'm 56 now, so that was what, like 5 years ago. But until about that time, my life was just like a complete dysfunctional mess on account of executive dysfunction. Like the specific skills that we consider executive functioning skills, like being able to be keep things organized and tidy, and being able to keep track of things, and being able to be consistent about calendaring, and just being able to function in those kinds of day-to-day ways, being able to start something and stay on track and then finish it. Like, by all of those measures, my life was just a big hot mess. I was just consistently not able to do those kinds of things. And then when I finally sort of learned about my neurodivergence, that was like this huge aha moment for me. And it was such a relief to at least know that it wasn't that I was lazy necessarily, that I wasn't lazy, or that I didn't have some terrible character flaw. Um, that wasn't the cause of all of that problem, all of those problems, but that there was something, wrong with me, that there was some disorder in my brain that caused me um, to not be able to function in those ways. And the consequences were pretty extreme. I wasn't able to hold down a job. I wasn't able to be like consistently follow the path of a career. I felt really bad about myself in lots and lots of ways. And And basically the bottom line is that I was just like consumed by shame about all of the failures in my life and all of the things that I had not been able to accomplish. And even though I had accomplished lots of things, it was almost impossible for me to focus on those because the big things that I was supposed to have accomplished, having a career, earning a living, being a solid middle class person who is independent and self sufficient, like I had just utterly failed at all of those things. Um, in ways that like my potential suggested that I should have been able, my potential, I mean that's such a loaded word, but like I was really good at school, et cetera, and so lots of people had lots of high hopes for me, and I felt like I let them down, and I let myself down, and I let the world down. um, and I thought when I sort of first discovered that I was neurodivergent, that, oh, well, okay, that explains it. Um, but and then I just sort of like thought, okay, well, that's just how it's going to have to be, I guess. And, I tried all the hacks and the strategies, and they would work for a while and they wouldn't work. And eventually I was just kind of like, this doesn't feel any different than before. Like I used to try all the hacks and strategies before too. And they didn't work then and they're not working now. So like, how does that help me? And that kind of forced me to look more deeply into what are these skills anyway, and what are the circumstances in which they're really hard, and especially to sort of look at the circumstances in which I could function on that executive level and ask myself, like, what is that about? Like if my brain is defective and my executive function is broken, then why does it come and go? Why are there some circumstances when I'm able to function okay, and then others when I'm not? Why is the issue consistency? Like that always kind of bugged me. It just didn't make sense that if I had this broken brain or this broken part of my brain, then why did it sometimes work? um, so, in the midst of all of this, I was doing a lot of, I was in therapy. I had left a marriage, gone through a really traumatic divorce, remarried, and over the course of that, I was in therapy and I was doing a lot of healing work for myself. Um, and what I really landed on was that the problem was not so much my brain, but the shame that I was living with, the shame that I was just like awash in. It was like I was swimming in a sea of shame for my whole life. Um, and when I started developing strategies to hack the shame, I mean, that's not really how I think of it, but like if we're going to talk about hacking something, let's talk about hacking the shame. Let's talk about hacking the trauma, because when I started to do that, when I started to really explicitly give myself permission to look at what I'm good at, to follow my interests, to seek pleasure for its own sake and not feel bad about that, um, to just like throw myself into my passions, and even if I abandoned them, to not feel ashamed of them, um, all of that led me to this tremendous healing, um, of sort of my soul, and of my psyche. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, and again, this is just one person's experience, that the executive dysfunction, mostly, for the most part, just kind of disappeared. Like it stopped being a problem. Like, I mean, I still lose my phone. In fact, I literally don't know where it is right at this moment. Um, But that happens to me all the time, and I know I'm not panicked about it. I had it this morning. I haven't left the house. I know it's somewhere. I just put it down somewhere. Like it's not that big of a deal, right? Like there are small ways like that are annoying, but that really aren't that big of a deal. And if I ever just like put a tile on the back of it, then I would be able to find it, or just left it on so I could call it. Um, but for the most part, the things that really matter, like I have been able to be consistent in. Developing a business, in um, building a following online around the issues that I just care so deeply about. I've built friendships, I've made art, I've done interior design in my home to create a space that works for me and my family. Like, I've been consistent. I don't miss appointments for the most part. Um, I keep on track. I have a to-do list and I cross things off of it. Like, I just find it so interesting that the only thing that ever helped for me was to heal my soul, to heal my psyche, like to heal my broken heart. Like, I was just so brokenhearted. And we, like, we can talk about whether it's trauma. I'm not a therapist. I don't pretend to be a therapist. I don't even want to be a therapist. Um, but I do know a little bit about trauma, and I know that a lifetime of feeling like a failure, a lifetime of feeling ashamed of not um, of not measuring up to what the world expects of you is, I think that creates as much dysfunction as anything that's broken in our brains, and that the things that remain are kind of minor. They're easily worked around. Um, like, even the losing my phone, like, there are workarounds. I just haven't bothered to like implement them yet because I'm just not that worried about it anymore. Um, so yeah, so I'm gonna check in. There's been some great comments. I'm trying really hard to keep my eye on the camera and not on the screen, but I can sort of see them popping up over in my peripheral vision. So I'm going to go take a look at that. Um, um, let's see. Smava, I'm not sure if you say it like that or if it's SSMAVA. I don't know. Um, I do love your little the design of your avatar with the falling, or not the fall, the hanging planets and stars. I love that. That's a beautiful little line drawing. Um, they say, any advice for an autistic parent that, simply put, has no executive functioning skills? Um, and then the next comment is from them as well. Yeah, I fail at all of that. Cleaning, I do well, but that's it. Um, well, congratulations on being good at cleaning. Like, that's huge. That's one of the things that I never was good at. I've gotten better at keeping up with my space and keeping it tidy in a way that works for me, not like obsessively out of shame because of what other people are going to think, but rather like, what are my needs around my space and focusing on that. Um, but I guess what I would say, actually, you say that you're a parent, that you're an autistic parent. Um, who has no executive functioning skills. This is what I would say. This is my latest sort of insight from my own life. I'm also a parent. My children are 25 and 24 and 18 years old. So they're largely grown and fairly independent. They're both um, wildly neurodivergent in their own ways, in slightly different, but their own ways. And also just like really amazing, wonderful, thriving human beings who I'm very in love with and proud of. Um, and I take very little credit for all of that. They're just amazing people, and that's just the way they arrived on the earth. But anyway, um, generally speaking, they don't need me in super extreme ways anymore, which I think is actually part of the reason that I have been able to accomplish what I have accomplished in the last couple of years. But just recently, in the last couple of weeks, um, not just my kids, but like, there've just been a whole set of circumstances in my life, in my family, in my in real life community, just a whole set of like unexpected circumstances where I have been called upon to do an enormous amount of emotional labor, to support other people in my life, and also to like keep myself regulated in the face of some difficult situations. Um, and wouldn't you know that my executive function kind of tanked? Like I started missing appointments. I started scheduling things incorrectly, like on the wrong day in my calendar, so that then I had things double scheduled. Um, I fell behind in all kinds of things that I said I was going to do, projects that I had planned. Um, and what I try to do now when things like that happen is, like I said, ask myself, what are the circumstances that have contributed to this decline of executive function? And what are the circumstances that contribute to things being easier? And what I would say is that it really just brought back to me what a struggle it was when I had children at home, and when I was like, I was a stay-at-home mom and a homemaker for a lot of years when my kids were little, and there were so many things that I loved about that. But but I was so tapped out all the time. My bandwidth was so tapped out all the time, um, and it really, like, this recent situation in my own life made me really feel like, oh yeah, right. It's just really hard. Like, it's just really hard to hold it all together when you're responsible for other human beings. And it may not be like being a parent. There may be lots of other circumstances where you're doing lots of emotional labor. Um, but I do think that that enormously affects our um, our bandwidth and our capacity. I think especially for those of us who are autistic. Um, so I guess the advice that I would have, to the extent that I try not to give advice too much, but is, and I know that this is so hard, but to the extent that it's possible, is to really take care of yourself as much as you possibly can. Um, what I had to do in the last couple of weeks is just like scale back, scale back. That's what I know now, is that when my executive function starts to tank, that probably means that I'm trying to do too much and that I need more rest. I need to scale way, way, way back. And it's often frustrating. That's not what I had in mind at all for these 2 weeks. I was going to write a novel. I was going to do all kinds of things on Instagram, and it just didn't happen. And sometimes you just have to accept that that rest is the solution, to the extent that you can work that into your lives, even when it means giving up other things that you really want to be doing and love doing, and just trusting that, like, it's a spiral, right? Like, I talk about this a lot, that time is a spiral for neurodivergent people, and it will come back around if you can trust that it's going to come back around. That is not quite so hard to let go. I think that this isn't the season for doing the things that you really wanted to do. Um, when I was part of an online moms group way back in the day. This was like early back, like pre-social media. My daughter was born in '97, and I was already online by the time she was like 1 or 2. Anyway, one of the moms in that group once said, "You can have it all, but not all at once." And I just thought that that has always stuck with me so much, that, like, there are different seasons of our lives, and the season of having kids at home is just a really all-consuming one. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up yourself, but it probably means that there are things that you may have to give up in order to be able to stay healthy and preserve your bandwidth. Um, ABIJCJ says, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Um, and that, let's try to put this one over here. A lot of executive dysfunction is us trying to force ourselves to do things we just don't care about and have been shamed into doing. Amen. Like, one, ABJ. Okay, I see. Thank you. Sorry. ABJ. Um, uh, I couldn't agree more. Um, and I've quipped in the past that executive function is really a set of capitalist skills, capitalist values masquerading as skills. And if you look at it closely at the supposed skills of executive function, they're like usually um, not oriented towards the perspective of the person who's supposed to have those skills. So, for example, this like the skill of prioritizing, like this child in the classroom is unable to prioritize, and inhibit their intrinsic desires in order to do something that's more appropriate and needed. Like that's one of the definitions of an executive function skill. And I'm always like, well, according to who? Like the kid has clearly prioritized. They just haven't prioritized what the teacher thinks they should prioritize. They are actually focusing on what is completely appropriate to them. It's just not appropriate to somebody else. So I think that so much of what executive function is about is a society that wants to impose its values on us and tell us that we need to function in this way or that way. Couldn't agree more. Okay, I'm gonna. Jess says, I really deeply relate and agree. Shame healing helps so much more than anything else. And let's see. My Melody says, I relate so much. I'm just now realizing in my mid 40s I'm ADHD, and as an artist, it's been a constant struggle following my dreams. I got my master's at Parsons and was supposed to do big things. Oh, Melody, I feel that so much. I wish I had gotten my master's at Parsons. I didn't even really realize that I was an artist until I was in my 50s. Like, I think that what happened to me is that I was always good at school, and so I just like took on that persona of like the intellectual. And when I got to college, and I'm sort of good at critical theory, so like I just took that on. And I actually went to law school and got a law degree, and like I was supposed to go clerk for the Supreme Court. I was just supposed to be like a really big wig, important lawyer, and I just like utterly crashed and burned and hated it so much, and felt enormous amounts of shame about that because I was supposed to do such big things. Sidra says that makes much more sense. There is a Sufi concept of being a mudtarib. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, which means only when you are intensely constrained, despite all efforts, do you find peace in the flow of things by decree. Yeah, thank you for that. Spiral Nerd says, yeah, shame is so immobilizing. 100%. And my Melody says also, being a stay-at-home mom with ADHD has been my biggest struggle, and emotionally and physically exhausted and put myself last and haven't been making art and need to. Yeah, Melody, I mean, I mostly loved being home with my kids because it meant that I wasn't in the work world. Like I wasn't a lawyer anymore. Like I went from being a lawyer, literally being a lawyer, to being a stay-at-home mom. So the I don't know, the contrast was like it was such a relief to me to be out of that office environment and the enormous pressures of billing at 6-minute increments and thousands of hours a year and all the rest of that. But I do feel you. And while I loved, like, those were some of the best years of my life, actually, because I just sort of threw myself into it. I just sort of surrendered to living my life at the pace of my children. And in many ways, that was really wonderful. But in retrospect, if I were going to do anything differently, I would not surrender quite so completely. Like I was just really into being attached to my kids and being there for them, and spending lots of time with them. I didn't really play with my kids, but I was almost always with them, and we co-slept and all the rest of it. And I, like, with both of them when they were really little, I never left them overnight. And I mean, that mostly worked for me, but I think that I went overboard in those ways, in that I sort of gave up myself. I mean, it's complicated because I was also in a marriage where there wasn't really any room for myself to be myself. And so, like, in many ways, my kids were the next, like, giving myself over to my kids was the next, was like sort of what was possible. And so it was the next best thing. But yeah, like, ultimately, it is not a selfish thing to take time out for yourself, to make art, and to take care of yourself and to do the healing. Like, I believe that it's worthy, you're worthy of doing those things just for yourself, all on your own, for no other reason and for nobody else. But I also believe in that adage of, like, they say put your own oxygen mask on first, because then you can help the person next to you. Like, I think it also will help your children. Um, and then Jess says, yes, thinking seasonally instead of daily is very comforting to me. Longer cycles. Oh my goodness, this is such a big one. Thinking seasonally for sure. I always find that if I, like, as I look forward, as I look at my day and as I look at the days ahead, I feel like I'm so unproductive. I don't get anything done. Even if I look back a couple of days, I feel super unproductive. Like, I haven't gotten anything done. It makes me anxious. Um, and this is all, like, assuming that that's even the value, right, that we want to uphold, productivity. But there is something too, like, especially if you're an artist, to making things, to building something, like, we can take that, the value of work outside of sort of the demands of a white supremacist capitalist culture, and still embrace our desire to make things. But when I look back further, when I look weeks back and months back and certainly years back, um, then suddenly I can see it. Like, I can see, like, oh, I really have done a lot of things, you know? But you can't, it's really hard, I think, when we get caught up in these tiny little cycles, these tiny little loops of time. Like, literally, when I was a lawyer, we billed in 6-minute increments. I was meant to keep track of my day by the 6 minutes. um, and if you go to the bathroom in the break room and make yourself a cup of coffee, suddenly, like, a lot of 6-minute increments are gone and wasted, and you haven't accomplished anything. Like, that's just no way to live. But even, like, 8-hour increments, even 5-day increments, like, those are just not increments that work for us. Try to give yourself some spaciousness, for sure. I couldn't agree more with that. Um, I would love to hear from any of you who are still around. What are some of the ways that you have been able to help yourself heal from shame, heal from trauma? Because I like I don't think that there's any magic bullet, but I do think that um, there's definitely no magic hack that's going to solve all of our problems, and that probably a longer term strategy of trying to heal ourselves, heal our broken hearts, is going to go a lot longer to helping us with the so-called executive dysfunction that does, I acknowledge, disrupt our lives sometimes. So I don't know if you guys have um, any things that have helped you out. As I said, for me, I was in therapy for quite a long time with a really great psychiatrist who was super helpful to me. Um, but I have also had really terrible experiences with therapists. So that is definitely hit or miss. And I'm also a just, like, hyper verbal person. Like, I process things verbally a lot. Um, and so that, like, talk therapy with somebody who I really clicked with and who really got me, um, that was really helpful to me. I don't know that talk therapy is really, for most people, the right strategy, especially given that there are so many bad therapists out there. Um, I know that For me, being in a natural environment um, is really helpful and important. Having beauty, just like filling my eyes with beauty, whether that's art or nature. Um, uh, let's see. Um, Learning about ANTs, automatic negative thoughts, and slowly retrain my brain to always question pretty much every automatic thought to consciously verify if it's true or unfair to me. Um, that's wonderful. I don't know this vocabulary about automatic negative thoughts, but it it very much calls to mind just sort of like um, quieting the inner critic, the toxic self talk. That has been a big change for me too. That like I rarely get into those loops of calling myself awful names and then sort of doubling down on it until you sort of spiral out. Um, I know that like it doesn't really matter what the vocabulary is, but like in sort of classic psychoanalytic theory, that would be like the super ego. And I remember a good friend of mine, um, a friend of hers who was I think a psychiatrist or at least a doctor, told her once that she needed every time her super ego started to talk to her, she needed to just tell it to get the fuck away, like leave me alone. um, because yeah, that toxic self talk is just not helpful at all. Um, oh boy, this is wonderful. All these comments that are piling in. Let's see. Dan says, stay away from people who constantly undermine your autonomy. Oh my goodness. Well, that's a huge one, isn't it? Like, this all started for me when I left a marriage that was just profoundly not working for me. And it was like I'd been in that marriage for 29 years. So that's a long, long time, right? To be um, in a relationship that doesn't really, that wasn't, it just didn't, it wasn't possible for me to be my best self in that relationship. Um, and as a consequence, I lost most of my community, my former community, in the divorce, which at the time was really traumatic. But really, in retrospect, I also realized that for the most part, those weren't people who were um, like giving me space to be myself either. Um, so I agree completely, Dan. Uh, Amelia says, something called journal speak helped me a lot with processing and purging deeply stored shame. I'd love to know more about that if you wanted to put any more in the comments about that. But I will definitely also just Google that because I love hearing about things that have worked for people for sure. Dan also says, I like to stay busy, walk daily, try to learn something maybe every day. So, yes, I have lots of projects. I always have projects. I, I think that that's wonderful. And I think that when you can get on top of the shame enough to be able to talk back to it, right? Like when you can identify, what did Amelia call or no, it was I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but about the automatic negative thoughts. When you can recognize those quickly enough, um, then you can sort of start shutting them down and let yourself do the thing that you used to feel ashamed about. Like that was a big one for me. There was a period of time, actually, when I started this YouTube channel several years ago, I was just like down a rabbit hole, like deep down a rabbit hole, learning all about YouTube, learning about social media, learning about online communities, learning about photography and videography, all these things. And like my house was a complete and utter disaster area because I was so hyper focused on starting this YouTube channel. And I just decided consciously, I'm just going to live with it being a mess. Like, I'm just done being ashamed. I'm just going to let myself run with this. It was such a like spirally rabbit hole. Like everything that I do right now, basically, even the Instagram, my online community and Mighty Networks, all of my ideas about neurodivergence, about executive functioning, about design thinking, all of them started in this like deep, spirally, unproductive, messy rabbit hole that was all about YouTube. So I I think that to the extent that you can like pursue the things that you love without feeling ashamed of them, if you can like shut down that negative self-talk and just go with it, that's wonderful. Um, that is very healing. I think that pleasure is healing. I think that pursuing the things that you love is healing. I think passion is healing. Um, let's see. Sidra says healing after a recent diagnosis is a very long journey. I'm still not sure if I'm doing much, especially in my current field of healthcare with a very competitive environment um, where there is an even, I'm not sure, even more accumulation of trauma as people are very impatient with executive dysfunction. Yeah, I with I get that. I think that this is sort of getting at what Dan was saying is that I do think it's really important for us to get ourselves out of the environments that are causing the shame, to like end those relationships, get out of those environments. For me, it was like pretty drastic, like leaving a marriage of 29 years and a community of even longer than that. Like I lost friends that I had made my freshman year of college when I was 17 years old, um, but I don't know that it had to be that way, but I do, and I still mourn it and grieve it. But I also see the upside of like getting out of those situations. Um, Amelia says it's similar in ways to morning pages from Artist Way, but a bit more potent. The person who shares information about it is called Nicole Sachs, LSC, LCSW. That's licensed clinical social worker. Okay, great. That I'm a that's like in reference to the journaling thing that I asked about. So I will definitely look into that. That's great. I've never used the Artist's Way or done morning pages, but I know people who have and who have found it super helpful. And I think that there are also some variations now out there that are a little bit less rigid. Maybe this is actually one of those that's sort of variations on the Artist's Way and morning pages. Um, but Julie says, agree with Dan, being around people who love and accept me regardless of how I'm functioning. Well, yeah, that's just everything, isn't it? I mean, I really, this is maybe a little self-promoting because I do offer an online community on Mighty Networks called Divergent Design Studios that's built all around the idea that peer support is where it's at. But that's the truth, is that like leaving relationships that were toxic and instead finding my people, a new marriage, an improved relationship with my children, and friends who actually get me and support me, like that has been everything. That has meant everything. That has been the key to all of the healing, I would say. So I completely agree with that. Um, Spiral Nerd says, developing self-understanding and self-compassion, even or especially for the parts of myself I find most frustrating. I really love that. Yeah. Um, hmm. I think that like that sort of self-compassion is huge. And it's like a hard pill to swallow sometimes when you realize that, oh, um, I've been part of all this. Like there are parts of myself that like I have agency, I have responsibility. I made mistakes too. I did things that kept me in bad situations. There was agency that I could have exercised and didn't. There were insights that I wish I had had earlier. And like being able to just like sit with that and accept it um, is hard. It's hard to do that without self recrimination and without just like feeding the shame. But when you can do it in that kind of way that Spiral Nerd is talking about, um, sort of self understanding and self compassion, and sort of, I don't know, forgiveness is exactly the right word, but um, that has been a big part of my own healing for sure. Um, Amelia also says, and brain spotting therapy, a non-talk therapy method. I will definitely look into all of this and doing farm work. Definitely, that was another thing that I was going to say is uh, physical, just movement, right? Like being in my body. I, I'm a pretty cerebral person, and like I said, very verbal, and critical thinking and critical theory are sort of my, my wheelhouse. And for many years in my life, and again, I embrace this very much. So in some ways I did it to myself, but I was like known as the smart person. That was my entire identity, was being a smart person. Um, and I often felt like I was just a body, like that my body existed mostly just to carry my brain around, you know? Um, and And so there were, and then like I also had infertility, so I wasn't able to carry a pregnancy to term, and um, there were other issues as well that like kept me dissociated from like the full lived experience of my body. And there were some things that I did like around my infertility. I actually like took up running. I had never thought of myself as an athlete at all. I had never been able to run. I have some lung issues that make it very difficult for me to run fast. And I actually like became a runner and ran a half marathon and a marathon. And like that was like part of my own healing from infertility. I felt like my body had betrayed me in some ways. And so this was like me doing something kind of amazing that I never thought I could do with my body. Um, and like that period of time in my life, even when I look back on it, was just a real like one of the better times in my life. Um, um, and Julie says somatic work can be very effective for identifying trauma and beginning to heal. I've also done in my life a lot of yoga, although I don't have a strong yoga practice right now, but it has been very helpful. I'm just looking at a few more of these comments. Uh, Melody says, for me, it's important to keep away from judgmental people. As soon as someone doesn't accept the way I am or do things, I cut them off. Yeah, I agree for the most part. I think that um, that certainly keeping people who are like that at arm's length. I think that one of the things that I'm learning is that like we're all sometimes not at our best, and that I'm trying to like learn how to be in friendship in a deeper way that doesn't have to be so all encompassing. And so um, that's probably a whole other topic, a whole other conversation. Um, let's see. Jess Meadow says acceptance and commitment therapy is my fave in terms of modalities, and I'm finding EFT tapping is really helping me physically process emotions lately. Oh my goodness. Also, peer support and truth telling. I'm loving all of this. I don't even know what all of that is, acceptance and commitment therapy, but I'm going to find out, especially since Jess is my friend and I can just go ask them. Dan says, I don't know. I don't feel like I need anyone's approval anymore. Um, I'll live my life the way I want. If you don't like it, hit the road. I mean, I think that that's Dan, you've arrived. Um, uh, yeah. Um, I agree that like when you can get to the point where it's a tricky balance though for me, like getting back to that whole friendship thing, like I'm not I'm not saying that I don't care about other people, and it's not even so much that I don't care about what they think or how they, you know, um, how they value me. But ultimately, I have a self that knows that it is valuable and that what I do matters, regardless of what other people think, especially people just like random people on the internet. Like that just like doesn't faze me at all anymore. Like negative comments, I just don't care. Like literally, like they just roll off my back. And that's a huge change for me. Um, I think that for me, it feels a little bit more complicated when it's somebody that I actually do care about, like figuring out how to find that balance of I don't care what you think about this particular thing, but I still care about you and I still care about you loving me, right? Like, I don't know, it's complicated. That would actually be a great conversation to have, wouldn't it, on this live stream? Talk about friendship, because that's a big issue for a lot of people. Um, Dan says talk therapy is excellent if you find someone smart enough to understand your difference. Yeah. Um,
All right, I gotta go.
uh, these are so many great comments. I'm just sort of looking through them quickly. Thank you all, first of all, just for jumping in. Like, this is, I feel so surrounded. Like I think I've often said that this whole live stream thing is a really strange thing. Like, I'm just sitting here in my studio. My husband is right over there doing his job. There's a computer screen right here where I'm looking at your comments, and then I'm just sort of looking at the camera and talking, and it can feel really weird and lonely. But like, then you all just jump in, and I appreciate it so much because it doesn't feel like I'm just here talking to a camera. It feels like I'm actually talking to real people. So thank you for that. I'm realizing that that we're at an hour now, and my goal is to try to keep these at an hour or less, just because I know that like going way over an hour is difficult for a lot of us. And I do want to make this be accessible to people after the fact. But I am definitely going to run through all of these comments after the live stream is over and keep track of them and coming back to them. And I'll see if I can cull some possible topics for future live streams. Um, so I guess just to sum up, what I would say about this topic is that I just think, like, I think that to the extent that you can find tricks and hacks and strategies and workarounds that actually work consistently for you, even if like even if the consistency is that you cycle through different ones, whatever, that make your life better, that's wonderful. I'm all for that. Um, I'd love it if you would, um, if you're watching this, especially after the live stream is over, drop those strategies and hacks in the comments. Leave links to where we can find out more about them. Tell us your story. Tell us about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I'm not saying that those kinds of things don't really help, but I do think that there's a real danger in the sort of quick and dirty, supposedly simple, this is going to solve all your problem kind of hack that somebody is willing to sell you. Um, I think that the problem with that is that most of the time they don't actually work, and that when they stop working, as somebody pointed out, it's usually at the very worst time. And what ends up happening is that it just makes you feel like you're even more of a failure, and it just compounds the shame. And I'm really convinced that the problem, the most fundamental problem, is not our brains, but the shame that we have been um, subjected to over a lifetime, most of us, for being just really weird and different and quirky. And I don't deny that we are many of those things, and I like embrace that. I like my weirdness and my quirkiness. I don't like being shamed for it. So healing the shame, um, finding strategies for healing the shame, the trauma, for soothing the nervous system, for learning self-compassion, for learning how to just like have a self at all, for learning how to take care of yourself over time, to value yourself enough to do that. Those are actually the strategies in the long run that are going to make your executive dysfunction, to the extent that you have that, less severe. Like, it's just going to make it so much easier for you to function in an executive sort of way, to the extent that you need to. Um, Uh, Sarah says, saddened I just logged on. Will this be posted? Absolutely, yeah. Um, all of these live streams just become videos on my channel, and you can watch them. And in fact, last week's video really kind of took off. I'm not sure why. I'm kind of thrilled about it, but it's done really well. It's had over 1,000 views now. Um, and if you are coming in now towards the end, or if you start watching this later, I would love to have you add. I think that there's the live stream comments, and then there's like comments down below. And the I don't know if you know much about YouTube, but like if you like my content and you'd like for it to do well so that the channel can grow and more people can find it, among the things that you can do are put actual comments under the video in the normal comment section, and to like it, and to subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell, all that stuff that everybody tells you you should do. If you really like my content, then you should do it here too. So, all right. I have now gone on way past what I want to. Oh, one other thing. The other thing that I would love for all of you to just like, as soon as I log off here, to go find the video wherever it resides as a video, not a live stream, and to put in the comments of this video also topics that you would like to have me live stream about, people that you might like to have me interview on the live stream, because I really, like I said at the beginning, executive function really isn't my thing. It's just what has sort of blown up a little bit um, on YouTube lately. So I sort of ran with it in these 3 initial live streams, but it's not at all what I want to be live streaming about over the long term. Like I said, I'm thinking about some interior design live streams specifically for neurodivergent people and around executive function issues. But I'd love to hear you put, not in the live stream comments, because I'm not sure if those stay. Put them in the comments under the video when the video becomes a video and not a live stream, if that even makes sense. All right. So I look forward to hearing from you. You can also always email me at marta@martarose.com. And thanks so much for being here. I really enjoyed it.